Quick demo of this video tutorial. Here we will implement ASP.NET Core Web API CRUD Operations with Angular 11 using Entity Framework Core and SQL Server. This is the final output of this project. Inside that, we have implemented operations like insert, update, delete, and retrieve on payment details like credit card or debit card. To insert a new record, fill up this form here. 3-digit security code, and finally the expiry month and year. Inside this form, we have implemented proper validation to each of these form controls here. Now submit the form. So here we have successfully inserted card details of Steve. List of card details is refreshed to fetch newly inserted record here. If you want to update a record, select the row from this list, then corresponding details will be populated inside this form here. Now let me update this owner name here. Submit the form. Corresponding record is updated. You could see the updated name here. To remove an existing record, click on this trash icon from this last column. Then confirm the operation. That's it. We have deleted the corresponding record from this application. Since we built this whole project from scratch, you could learn a lot and you could apply the same in a future project. I am sure you will find this tutorial helpful for your upcoming Angular and ASP.NET Core projects. So please watch till the end of this video. Hi all, welcome to CodAffection. In this video, we will implement ASP.NET Core Web API CRUD Operations with Angular. We have already discussed the same with all versions of the frameworks, which was in Angular 7 and ASP.NET Core 2.2. If you try the same with latest versions of this framework, it won't work as expected. So I decided to make that video again with latest versions Angular 11 and ASP.NET Core 5.0. In parallel to this video tutorial, I have a text article on the same topic. Link is given in video description, where I would try my best to update the content with future versions of these frameworks. Before starting this video, I would like to thank for your PayPal donations for my previous works. In order to make more helpful and quality tutorials like this, you can also support me through PayPal or other payment methods. Details are given in video description. Now, without further ado, let's get started with the topic. As always, first of all, we will be creating an ASP.NET Core Web API project. Before getting into that, I want to clarify a few doubts that you may have regarding latest .NET 5.0. If you want to skip this section and start creating the Web API, you could jump to the timestamp given here. The previous versions of the framework are named as .NET Core, then the version number, like 1.0, 1.1, 2.0, and then the last major release was .NET Core 3.1. But as a next major release after .NET Core 3.1, we have .NET Core 5.0. You may have some doubts like I had when I heard of this release. It is named as .NET 5.0, why it's not .NET Core 4.0. It is already mentioned in this article while explaining new changes and updates in .NET 5. I have given this article link in video description. We named this release .NET 5.0 instead of .NET Core 4.0 for two reasons. We skip the version numbers 4.x to avoid confusion with .NET Framework 4.x. Before .NET Framework, we have been using this platform .NET Framework. The major difference between them is that .NET Core is cross-platform and the old platform .NET Framework is only specific to Windows operating system. So the majority of those release versions start with 4. To avoid the confusion with these versions here, they skip the version 4. So that explains 5.0 here. Now the second reason explains dropping the word core from the latest release name, which is to emphasize that this is the main implementation of .NET going forward. .NET 5 supports more type of apps and more platforms than .NET Core or .NET Framework. So the upcoming versions of the framework will be named as .NET 6, .NET 7, .NET 8 and so on. Even though the word core is dropped from .NET 5, Sub-frameworks ASP.NET Core 5 and Entity Framework 5 retains the name Core to avoid confusion with all versions of those sub-frameworks. That means in this tutorial we will be working with ASP.NET Core 5 and Entity Framework Core 5. Also, .NET 5 comes with C# 9. If you want to know new changes and updates in .NET 5, you could check this article later. I have given the link in video description. Now let's create the Web API in ASP.NET Core 5. So here is my Visual Studio 2019. In order to work with .NET 5, I have updated the IDE to the latest version here. And in order to update the IDE, I have used this application here, Visual Studio Installer. Okay. Now let's select this project template here, ASP.NET Core Web Application. With these options selected from these top drop downs here, you could easily find the template here. Now click on Next. To demonstrate CRUD operations, we will be dealing with payment details of a customer. So I will name this project as Payment API. Now select the location where you want to save this project. Click on Create. Now select ASP.NET Core Web API. Now make sure from these top drop downs here we have selected .NET Core and ASP.NET Core 5. For now, we don't need this HTTPS configuration since we are working in a development environment. If you want, you can enable this option also. And finally, here we have Open API support. This is optional. With this, we can test our Web API methods. So I will enable this option here. Now click on Create. So here is the brand new Web API project. When it comes to ASP.NET Core 5, there is nothing major difference from previous version. So let's get started with the project development. As I mentioned already, we are going to implement CRUD operations on payment details of a customer. So first of all, we will be creating a model for the entity. For that, let's create a new folder, add new folder, models. Inside that, let's add a model class, payment detail. So first of all, here we have the primary key, which is payment detail ID. Now we have to mark this property as primary key with this attribute key. Now we have to add the corresponding using statement up here. For that, you can use this shortcut, place the cursor on the attribute, then hold Control, then press period. Now select the appropriate using statement here. Now we can add rest of the properties. Card owner name, card number, expiration date, and finally security code. Since we are creating model class for Entity Framework Core, once we migrate this into an actual physical DB, columns corresponding to these string properties will have the data type nvarchar max, which is more than what we need for these properties here. So let's specify the column data type separately. So we can use this attribute column. We have to add the corresponding namespace. So use the shortcut, hold Control, then press period. Type name is equal to nvarchar 100. Now let me copy paste this for remaining properties here. Nvarchar 16, assuming that internationally card number can have maximum up to 16 characters. And then we have expiration date. For that we have 5 characters. So it will be of the type MM/YY. Okay, so maximum we need 5 characters here. And finally we have the security code. For that I will set 3 characters here. So here we have the payment detail model. Now with this model class defined here, we can create our DB context class. As you know, in Entity Framework, DB context class decide what should be created in physical DB through migration. So in order to create a table for this model class here, we have to have a property corresponding to this class in our DB context class. So let's create that DB context class here. I will name it as payment detail context. First of all, we have to inherit this class from Entity Framework base class DB context. Before that, we have to install Entity Framework core into this Web API project here. For that, right click on this project here, then manage and NuGet packages. From this browse tab, search for Entity Framework core. Now let's install this package here, Microsoft Entity Framework core. Now from this version drop-down, select the same version as that of ASP.NET Core. Click on Install, accept the license. Once you install a package successfully, you could see this green icon next to it. Now we have to install two more packages, Entity Framework Core SQL Server. Select the same version, click on Install. And finally, we have to install this package also, Entity Framework Core Tools. Select the same version, click on Install. So here we have successfully added Entity Framework Core into ASP.NET Web API. Now back to the DB context class here. Now let's add the corresponding using statement with the shortcut. Hold Ctrl, then press period, Microsoft Entity Framework Core. Now we have to add constructor for this class. For that, you can use this snippet CTOR, then hit tab. Now let's add the parameter for this constructor here. So DB context options of the type, same class, payment detail context as options. We will explain this parameter later. For now, let's complete this function definition here. Now along with this constructor, we also have to call the base class constructor. So we can do this. Into that, we have to pass the same parameter options. Now let's add a property for this model class that we have created here, payment detail. So here we have the property DB set of the type payment detail model class. So I will name this class as payment details. So with this property added here, after migration, there will be a table corresponding to this model payment detail. Now let's talk about this constructor parameter here, DB context options. Into this parameter, we have to pass two informations. Database provider, it can be SQL Server, MySQL, PostgreSQL, etc. And then database connection string with the database name that we want to create through migration. As you know, a class constructor parameter will be passed when corresponding class instance is created. In ASP.NET Core, we can make use of dependency injection for creating DB context class. So we will do the dependency injection in startup class here. Don't freak out if you don't know how dependency injection works. I will explain everything once we create a controller inside this project. For now, from this startup class, configure services method, we will be passing value for this constructor parameter DB context options through dependency injection. So first of all, we can do this services dot add DB context function can be called. Into that, we have to pass the type of DB context here. So payment detail context. Now let's add the corresponding model namespace here. Now inside this function, we can pass the constructor parameter here with this arrow function options. Options. From options parameter, we can call this function use SQL Server. Now let's add the corresponding namespace. Now by calling this function here, we have specified SQL Server as a DB provider. Now into this function, we have to pass corresponding DB connection string. Now first of all, we have to save the DB connection string inside this JSON file here, app settings. So I will add a new item here, connection strings, with this name dev connection. For now, I will paste the connection string here. So for this project, I will be using this local SQL Server instance here. And here we will be assigning a new DB, payment detail DB. Since we are using local authentication, I have set this property trusted connection as true. In order to execute multiple query batches, we have set this property multiple active result sets as true. Now let's pass that connection string inside this function here. For that, we can make use of this configuration of the type I configuration here. So we just need to do this configuration dot get connection string function can be called. Into that, we have to pass the connection string that we have saved here. So dev connection. Now we have done everything for our database. Now we can do the migration with this DB context and the model class here. Migration is the process of creating physical DB with the model and context defined here. So first of all, we have to build this project here to make sure there is no error inside this application so far. Once you build the project successfully, you could see the success message in bottom left corner here. Now to execute migration commands, we have to open Package Manager console. In my IDE here, it's already here, Package Manager console at the bottom panel. If you can't see Package Manager console here, select the project from Solution Explorer, then go to Tools, and you get Package Manager, then Package Manager console. Now first of all, we have to create a migration. For that, we can execute this command here, add migration. Now let's provide a name for this migration, something like initial create. Hit enter. As a result of the command execution, you could see a new folder, migrations, with corresponding C# file here. Inside this newly created C# file, it has C# code for creating actual physical DB. We have not yet created a DB with this command, we just created this file. To execute this file, we have to execute one more command here. So which is update -database. Hit enter. Now the update command is executed successfully. Now let's check whether it created a physical DB or not. For that, here is my management studio. Let's connect with the local server. Expand databases node. So here is our new DB, payment detail DB. Inside that, we should have a table corresponding to our model class. So here it is, payment details. So inside this SQL Server table, we have columns corresponding to these model properties here. First of all, here we have the primary key, payment detail ID, and rest of the columns are created as per our model class. Now with this column selected, go to column properties here. Let's expand identity specification. Inside that, you could see this is identity set as yes, which means we don't have to insert value into this payment detail ID column. SQL Server will take care of that. It will start from 1 and incremented by 1 upon new record insertion. Now back to the Web API project here. Now let's create a Web API controller with necessary web methods for payment detail CRUD operations. For that, right click on controllers, then add controller. Now from left panel, select API. Now select this scaffold item, API controller with actions using entity framework. Click on add. Model class will be payment detail. Now select the DB context class that we have just created. I will name this controller as payment detail controller. Click on add. Some of you may get this error while creating the API controller. No need to freak out, we just need to install this NuGet package, Microsoft Visual Studio Web Code Generation Design, and just try again. So click on OK. Let's cancel this. Then right click on this project here. Manage in NuGet packages. Within this search box, just search for this package codegeneration.utils. You only have to install this package if you have an error like I had here. Click on install. Accept the license. Once it is done, close this NuGet package manager. Then let's try again. Add controller API with actions using entity framework, payment detail, then payment detail context. Controller will be payment detail controller. Click on add. Boom, that's it. As a result of scaffolding mechanism, here we have the payment detail controller with all of the web methods required for the CRUD operations. We will look into that in a bit. Before that, let's talk about this controller constructor and dependency injection. As you know, this payment detail controller is a class, normal C# class, which is inherited from this controller base class from ASP.NET Core, as you can see here. An instance of this controller class will be created by ASP.NET Core when we make an HTTP request into these web methods in it. This constructor has a parameter of the type payment detail context, which is saved into a private property here, and thereby rest of the web methods inside this controller can make use of that context DB context object to interact with the DB through entity framework. Now, from where do we pass the value for this parameter context of the type DB context? That's where the dependency injection comes. We have already defined the dependency injection inside startup.cs here. We have already defined dependency injection for the DB context inside this startup class by calling this function add DB context. So an instance of this DB context class will be created by passing its constructor parameter as mentioned here. DB provider with corresponding DB connection string. Whenever an instance of API controller is created and if its constructor has a parameter of the type DB context, that instance will be shared from this dependency injection here, so that we can focus on rest of the web methods here. Now let's look how these web methods works and how we can make use of them from our client-side application. For that, first of all, let me run this application here without debugging. So once we run our API, you could see an interface looks like this. Here you could see all of the endpoints or controllers and its web methods that we can make use of. Now inside this we have the web methods that we can make use of from our payment detail controller. We have this user interface here since we have selected the option for Open API support while creating the project. Now let's make a GET request. So click on this GET section here. Click on try it out. No parameters needed for this web method. Click on execute. So here is the response, an empty array. Now let's look what we have inside this web method here. So here we have the URL that we have made, API/payment detail. As mentioned inside this startup class here, the routing for this application is left to corresponding controllers here. So the controller is already defined its routing structure, API/controller, so API/payment detail, and here we have made the GET request. With this web method here, we will retrieve all of the records that we have inside the DB table payment details. For now, we don't have any row inside this table, so that explains this empty array here. In Entity Framework, list of records from a table can be accessed with corresponding DB set property, which is here payment details. And finally, to convert that into a list, we have called this function to list async. Now after this GET request, let's try this POST request here, with which we can insert a new record. So here it is. Let me close this. Let's make a POST request. Click on try it out. For this POST web method, we have a parameter of the type payment detail model through which we can pass values for the new object to be added. So with this JSON format selected from here, I'm going to pass a new object here. Card number is specified with this data type nvarchar 16. So maximum we can have 16 characters here. Now expiration date, month, then last 2 digits from the expiry year, then security code. Before this Open API support, we were using Postman. Now with this Swagger UI here, we can test our API from our application itself. Click on execute. Boom. So here we have the response 200, meaning request went successful. As a result of the request, we have inserted a new object and that is returned as a response here with the newly inserted ID or primary key. Now let's check that inside this table here. Let me execute this query again. Boom. So here it is. So inside this post web method here, we have passed the object with this parameter, and with the help of Entity Framework to insert a record, we just need to call this add method from the corresponding DB set property that we have defined here. And finally, we just need to call this function save changes and thereby the corresponding SQL queries will be executed in backend so that new record will be inserted into the table here. And that's how this record is inserted into the table here. Finally, with this return statement here, it will return the newly inserted object. We will explain how this works in a bit. Back to the API here. Inside this request body, we have sent this JSON object. Since we are receiving this JSON object with this model property here, payment detail, these JSON properties are in camel casing and that of this model is in Pascal casing. Hope you know what is meant by Pascal casing and camel casing. In camel casing, all of the words first letter will be uppercased except the first word here. In Pascal casing, all of the words first letter will be uppercased. As per the naming convention in C# applications, I have named these class properties in Pascal casing. While in case of client-side applications, Angular, React, or JavaScript language or JSON, according to their naming convention, properties are named in camel casing. How do these properties bind to corresponding properties inside this model here? We don't have to convert this camel casing into Pascal casing while receiving the object. It's already done by the ASP.NET Core. The reverse happens when we receive data from the API. You could check that with this GET request here. Let's execute this again. Now it returns the one object that we have just created. You could see that all of these properties are returned in camel casing. It's done by the API itself. Now it's not mandatory to follow any of these naming convention in any of these frameworks, whether it is ASP.NET Core or the client-side application Angular or React. You could name these properties in camel casing and thereby you are using camel casing on both sides. In that case, you have to disable the default conversion that's already there inside this ASP.NET Core. For that, you have to update this startup function, configure services, like I have mentioned inside the article here. With these codes here, I have given the link of this article in video description, but as a best practice, C# developers follow Pascal casing for class property naming. Now, back to the post Web API method here. Finally, from this Web API method, this function is called created@action. It will return a status code 2.1. It means a new object is created in server side. You could see the same under server response 2.1. And the new object is returned from this statement. So with these two parameters here, this function will create an URL for the newly created object. You could see that here. So with this URL, we can retrieve the same object that we have retrieved. Let me copy this and pasting here. We can call that from this browser tab directly. So here it is. We have made a GET request and it returns the corresponding object. So here we have the web method that we have just invoked with this request here. Get payment detail. We have already discussed this first get method, which is to return all of the records inside the table. And with this web method, we will return a specific record with the given ID here. For that, we will call this find function from the DB set. If there is an object for the given ID, it will be returned here. If it's not there, a for not found error will be returned. So we have called this Web API method with the URL here, which is written as a response of the post request here, and which is made possible because of this function here, created@action. It will return the newly created object URL along with the newly created object. Now we have two more web methods. We have discussed these three web methods. Now let's talk about this put method here, which is to update a given record. That request will reach up to this web method here, put. So the corresponding URL will be of the format like this. That ID will be received with this parameter ID here, and with this payment detail parameter we can receive the updated new object. So first of all, it will compare the ID from this parameter and the ID inside this object ID. It will be there inside this property payment detail as the primary key. If they match each other, we just need to set the state of this model property as modified, and finally just call the save changes function. Now there is a possibility for this concurrency exception that is handled inside this catch block here. Suppose this application is used by a wide range of users. There is a possibility of deleting or modifying same record by multiple users. That situation is called concurrency. It can be handled in different ways. It's a topic for another discussion. You could check out this MSDN article here. I have given the link in video description. It explains how you can deal with concurrency conflicts in Entity Framework Core. If you end up inside this if-else block here, the record or data that you are going to work with is already deleted by someone else. So it will return this error for not found. Else, it will throw this exception. If you really want to know this concurrency exception in detail, please check out that article. If we try to explain that here, this video will be even longer. We can discuss that in another video. Finally, if the update operation is successful, it will return this response no content. Let's try that here. Let's make this put request. Click on try it out. We are going to update this record with the ID 1. So we will pass 1 here. Now here we have to pass the object with updated details. For now, I will just copy that from here and then I will paste the same here. These two properties should match each other. So I will pass the same value here, 1. Now let's make some modifications here. Now click on execute. Boom. So here it is. From this web method here, we have returned no content. So there is nothing to look for inside this response. Now let's check whether the record is updated or not. Let me execute this again. Boom. So you could see the modifications here. Now finally, let's try this delete operation here. Click on try it out. We are going to delete this record here. So ID will be 1. Click on execute. Let's check that here inside the table. It's deleted. So here is the corresponding Web API method, delete. Through this ID parameter, we will receive the ID that we have passed while making this request. And with that, it will find the corresponding record and saved into this payment detail variable here. If it's not null, we will remove that from the table by calling this our function remove. And finally, we just need to call this save changes function after any of the operations insert, update or delete. And finally, like we have done inside the update operation or web method, we will call this no content method. Without any modification in any of these web methods, we can do the basic CRUD operations. Based on your logic of implementation, you may need to modify these web methods on a practical project. You could do that once you learn the basic CRUD operations. Here we have a solid Web API project implemented all of the CRUD operations. Now let's look how we can make use of these web methods from our Angular project. Now let's create a client-side app in Angular 11 inside the same folder where we have already created our Web API project. In order to work with latest versions of Angular, we just need to update Angular CLI. For that, I have been using these two commands one by one. In order to uninstall existing Angular CLI, first of all, we can execute this command here, and then to install the latest version, we can execute this npm command here. I have given this Stack Overflow link in video description. You could check that from there also. Now let's create an Angular 11 project here. For that, first of all, we have to open command prompt from the same folder directory. For that, you can use this shortcut here. Inside this folder path, just type cmd, then hit enter. So here we have opened the command prompt from the same folder directory as that of this folder here. To create an Angular project, you could do this ng new, the name of the application. For now, I will name it as payment app. Hit enter. While creating the application, it may ask questions like this to configure the app further. In this case, it asks for whether we want to enforce strict type checking and strict bundle budgets. We could discuss that in this application later. For now, I want to enforce strict type checking, so I will choose Y for yes so that we can reduce runtime errors. Hit enter. Would you like to add routing? No. Which style sheet format would you like to use? I will stick with CSS. Hit enter. Currently it is installing some default npm packages into this application. It may take a while based on your internet speed, so please be patient. Finally, we have created the app successfully. We will develop this application in VS Code Editor, and while we have the Web API in Visual Studio. I have chosen this IDE combination based on your suggestions from our previous community poll. Now, in order to open newly created Angular app in VS Code Editor, first of all, we have to navigate inside the application folder, which is already created here, payment app. So, cd payment app. To open this folder in VS Code Editor, you could do this code space period. Hit enter. So here we have the brand new Angular 11 project. Before doing anything, first of all, let's run this application. For that, let's open a terminal from this IDE here. Then you could execute this Angular CLI command ng serve. This will compile and run this application from localhost. And in order to open the same app from our default web browser, you could add this flag O. Hit enter. Would you like to share anonymous usage data about this project with Angular team? No. Hit enter. So this is how the default view of a fresh Angular application. Now let's start customizing as per our requirement. So back to the VS Code Editor here. Most of the development will be there inside this src folder here. So here we have the index.html, which is the root HTML file for the entire application. Inside that we have the basic HTML declaration with head and body part. Inside the body you could see this tag for the component, default component app. So here is the app component. Inside that you could see this TypeScript file for the component where we have this selector app root. With that selector, here we have the tag with open and close tag. So this will be replaced with this component HTML file here, app component HTML, which is here. So this HTML file is responsible for the default view of the application here. Now let's start customizing this app as per our requirement. Before that, I want to show the structure of the application that we want to build here. For that, let me create a new file here, app structure.txt. I have already prepared this structure. For now, I will paste that here. So here we have the root file src. So inside that we have this app folder here. As we have mentioned, inside this application, we will be dealing with payment details of a customer. So inside this application, basically we will be having two components. The parent component, payment details, it will be created inside this app folder here. So here we have the parent component, payment details, and here we have the child component, payment detail form. Inside this component here, we will design a form for the CRUD operation. And inside this parent component, we will list all of the records that we have already inserted. And there will be a separate folder shared for saving service and model class for payment detail. For designing this app, we will be using Bootstrap style sheet, and for icons, corresponding style sheet reference will be added into this root HTML file index.html. Now let's create these components here. For that, let me open one more terminal. To create an Angular component, you could execute this command ng G for generate, C for component. The name of the component, which is payment details. So let me copy paste that here. For the single component payment details, it will create these 4 files. This is for the TypeScript file where we have the component definition, and inside this HTML we will design the component. Here we have the component specific style sheet where we can add CSS rules specific to this component. Finally, here we have the test file with the extension spec.ts, which is for test purpose. Inside this application, we don't need this component specific style sheet and this test file. For these two components, we have to skip these two files, this style sheet file and this test file. We just need to do this. In order to skip the component specific style sheet, we can add this flag here, S. And to skip this test file here, we could do this, skip test, hit enter. So here we have the new component, payment details with corresponding HTML and TypeScript files. Now let's create its style component, payment detail form. For that, we just need to modify previous command. Since we are going to create this new component as a child component to this one here, we can do this parent component / the name of the child component. Okay, hit enter. So here we have the child component payment detail form with corresponding HTML and TypeScript file. While creating these HTML and TypeScript file, at the same time, the app module.ts file is also updated, as you can see here. So here it is, app module.ts file. Inside an Angular application, everything is organized into modules, different modules. By default, inside an Angular application, there will be a default module, which is this app module here. So corresponding to this app module, we have this folder app. Inside that, we have created all of our new component and also this default component app. So in order to make use of these components that we have just created, we also have to add the same into this declarations array. So both of our new components are already added into this array declarations here, since we have created it through our Angular CLI here. Now we have to create two more classes here. They are these model and service classes. So first of all, let me create this service class here. We will use this service class in order to interact with the web API that we have created before. So ng, G for generate, S for service. We have to create this service class inside a new folder, shared. So shared / payment detail. For a service class file, we just need to skip this test file with the extension spec.ts. In order to skip the test file, we could do this, skip test, hit enter. So here we have the service class within this shared folder. Now inside this same folder shared, we have to create this model class here. Unfortunately, there is no specific command for creating a model class in Angular CLI, even though we could do the job with class creation command. So here is our previous command, ng, G for generate. Instead of a service class, we have to create a class file, and the name of the class will be same as that of the service class, payment detail. Now it's recommended to name model class files like this, .model.ts. In order to have this extension .model, we can use this flag here, type. So double hyphen type is equal to model. So here is our Angular CLI command for creating our model payment detail. Type is equal to model, hit enter. So here we have the new file payment detail.model.ts for our model class payment detail. Now we have created all of the components required for our application here. Now let's start developing this application. First of all, let me add a style sheet reference for both of these Bootstrap and Phone Awesome icons. So first of all, go to the official website for Bootstrap, getbootstrap.com. Click on Get Started. Now let's copy this style sheet reference. Now let's paste that inside this index.html here. I will do that just above this head end tag. Now like this, we have to add CDN reference for Phone Awesome icons. So let's search for CDN Phone Awesome. Most of the time I will copy the CDN reference from this website here, cdnjs.com. Now let's copy this link tag for phone awesome all.min.cs file. Now let's paste that just above this head end tag. Now back to this model class here. Now let's add required properties like we have added inside this Web API model here. First of all, let's enter into Zen mode, which is a feature in VS Code editor, so that we can hide every panel except the current editing file. In order to search for the feature Zen mode, first of all, you could do this Ctrl+Shift+P, then search for Zen mode. You can click on this option to enter into Zen mode, or you can use this shortcut here. I like this mode because there is no distraction. So first of all, we have the property payment detail ID corresponding to the primary key that we have here inside the Web API model. As we have discussed before, the ASP.NET Core will convert these Pascal case properties into camel case when we retrieve the data, and when we send the data, the camel case JSON will be converted into Pascal. When we submit data from this Angular project here, we will be passing data through camel case properties. When it reaches up to this ASP.NET Core Web API here, it will be automatically converted into corresponding Pascal case, and it will be binded to this corresponding property here. Now we have to specify the type of this property here. Now you could see this red squiggly line here. It says the property has no initializer and is not definitely assigned in constructor. This error is shown here because of the forced strict mode that we have already configured while creating this Angular application. Enforcing the strict mode is helpful for reducing runtime errors, but we don't need this specific rule here. Now let's look how to remove or ignore this specific strict rule here. For that, first of all, we have to open the file explorer. You can use the shortcut, hold Ctrl, then press B. All of the configuration that we have done while creating this application is stored inside this file here, tsconfig.json. Now in order to ignore this specific rule here, we will reset this property here, strict property initialization, as false. Now the error is gone. Now to hide this explorer, use the shortcut Ctrl B. Now let's add rest of the properties here. Card owner name as string, card number, expiration date, security code. Now here we have the model class. Now let me open the Explorer. Now let's design a form for the CRUD operation with payment details that we can do inside this style component here. So here is the corresponding TypeScript file, and here is the corresponding HTML file. First of all, let me create a property of the type model class inside this service class here. Here is the property form data of the type payment detail, which is our model class. Click on this auto suggestion here. It will automatically add the import statement at the top. Now let's initialize that with a new instance of the model class payment detail. Hi guys, how you doing? I'm coming here after completing the whole project recording. Here I want to make a correction. Here I was expecting this new instance of payment detail will return an object containing all of its properties with the default values. That's what happens in C#. This number will have the value 0, and all of these string will have the default value empty string. That will be happening in C#. But here in TypeScript, that's not the case. If we create an instance of the class like this with a new keyword, it will return an empty object like this. Instead of that, we need an object of payment detail with all of these properties with the default values. For that, we have two options. Either we have to create a separate constructor like this. Inside that, we have to initialize these properties one by one like this. Like this, we have to initialize rest of the properties. So it is a little bit annoying, so I will just remove this constructor. Instead of that, we can initialize these properties while declaring them. So all of the string properties will be initialized with empty string. Now inside this form data, we will have a new object of payment detail with the default values. Now, while showing this model class in rest of this video, you won't be seeing this initialization here because I have made this correction after completing this whole project recording. Now you can continue with the rest of the video. Now using this property form data of the type payment detail model class, we can design a form inside this component HTML file here. For that, first of all, we have to inject this service class inside this TypeScript file here. So we could do this public service, which is of the type payment detail service. So this dependency injection is also similar to the Web API dependency injection. Whenever an instance of this component is created, an instance of service class will be passed or shared into this constructor property here. Now with this service class, we can access this form data that we have created here. Since we have created this property inside this service class, we can share the same with other components also, because this service class instance will be injected or this instance will be shared among all of the other components. So the changes that we have done from this child component can be accessed from this parent component here, payment details. Now back to the child component. Using this injected service property, we can design the form here. First of all, let me get rid of this default HTML from here, form. Now first of all, I will add a hidden field for this primary key here, payment detail ID. So here it is, input type is equal to hidden. For input controls, we have to set the name property. I will set it as payment detail ID. Now let's set the value for this control here that we can pass from this model class property form data of the type payment detail. So we will do this service dot form data. We have injected the service class instance. Inside that we have the property form data of the type model class. Inside that we have payment detail ID. Now for the rest of the properties, we will add this div with this bootstrap class form group. Instead of typing this manually, you could use this emmet abbreviation here. First of all, type the HTML element that we want to add, and then after this period symbol, we can provide the name of the class, form group, then hit tab, boom. This is a simple application of emmet abbreviation. You could create multiple HTML elements like this with a single abbreviation. Later, if you have time, please do check out how you can make use of emmet abbreviations. Inside that we need a label. So with emmet abbreviation, we could do this. Just type label, then hit tab. We don't need this for attribute here, so I will just remove that from here. Card owner name. Now we need a text box, so we could do this input, and we have to add these classes from bootstrap. So form hyphen control, then we need one more class, so we could do this form control LG. Hit tab. So here we have the input control with those two classes, form control and form control LG. We don't have to specify the type of this control as text separately. By default, it is text. So I will just remove that from here. Now here we have the placeholder as full name. For all of the input controls, we have to specify the name attribute. So card owner name. All of the visible controls inside this form will be binded to this model class properties through two-way data binding. In order to do that, first of all, we have to have this reference for the control card. I will just copy this card owner name, and we will assign that with ng model. And then here is our two-way data binding. ng model is equal to, we will assign the respective property like we have done for this hidden field here. So service dot form data dot card owner name. like this, let's add rest of the input controls for rest of the model properties. So I will just copy paste this div here. Let me modify this label here, card number. Placeholder will be 16-digit card number. Now we have to update this name property and this two-way data binding here. Now you could use this shortcut, hold Ctrl then press D. It will select the next occurrence of the word. So hold Ctrl then press D. So here we have selected to card owner name. Now let's do that once again. So we have selected all of the card owner name that we want to update. Now let's type card number. Like this, let's add rest of the form controls. Let me copy this and pasting that below twice for security code and expiration date. So first of all, we have security code. Instead of showing entered characters into this field, I will show them as dots or bullets. For that, you can set this type as password. Now let's set the placeholder. Now let's update these attributes or properties. And finally, we have the expiration date. So a label will be valid through. Inside the placeholder, I will enter the format of expiration date mm/YY. Now let's update these attributes and corresponding properties. Expiration date. Now let me exit from the Zen mode. For that, hit escape twice. Currently we are showing the default component inside our application here. Instead of that, let's show our newly created components, payment detail and its child component. So here is the default component, app component.html. Let's get rid of these default HTML elements from here. And inside that, I will add this div with this bootstrap class container. Inside that, we will show this parent component, payment details. So here is the corresponding TypeScript file. In order to show this component, we can use this selector app-payment-details. So let me copy this. Inside this HTML here, we just need to create a tag for the selector. Now to create a tag for this selector, you can use this shortcut. Just retype this last character here, yes, then press tab. Now this parent component HTML payment details .component.html will be shown. Instead of this default paragraph, we want to show this child component HTML payment detail form. In order to show this HTML, we want to create a tag for this component selector. So let's add a selector for the child component. First of all, we will have the module name. By default, we have app module, the name of the component, which is payment-detail. So here we have the emmet abbreviation shown in auto suggestion. Hit tab, so corresponding tag will be added. So inside this parent component, we have shown the child component, and inside this app component HTML, we have shown this parent component payment details. Now this component selector will be replaced with its corresponding HTML file here. Since we have used two-way data binding here, we have to add corresponding module inside this app module.ts file here. So first of all, we have to add the corresponding import statement here. From Angular/forms, we have to import forms module. Now let's add the same inside this imports array here. Now let me save all of these modifications and back to the application here. Boom. So this is how the form looks like. For some of you, you may not be seeing this form here. You will be having some errors showing here or here inside the terminal where we have run our application. While developing this application, we might be making major errors inside the application. It will block from recompiling this application, and that's the reason for not showing the form like this here. In that case, you could restart the server. First of all, in order to stop the server, you could use this shortcut Ctrl+C. Then type Y for yes. Then execute the command again, ng serve-o. Still, if this terminal is showing some errors that we have already cleared before, like the strict enforcement, we can relaunch this window or IDE. For that, you can use the shortcut Ctrl+Shift+P, then type reload window, then click on this option here. It will relaunch this IDE with the same project. It will remove all of the chaos that caused the project from running previously. If you still have some problem, let me know in comment box below. If there is any valid error showing inside this terminal, you have to fix that first. Okay, so here we have the payment detail form. This form is stretched to the entire width of the application. We can fix that later. For now, I want to show these two controls in a same line, both security code and expiration date. For that, back to the VS Code editor here. For that, we can add this div with this class form draw. Now let's enclose these two form group divs with this new div here. So let me cut this div and tag here and pasting that here. Now we have enclosed both of these form groups within this form draw here. Now both of these divs will be shown in a single draw. In order to divide them into two halves, we can add this class here called MD6. Let's add the same class to the second div here. So here we have shown both of these input controls into two halves in a same line. Now before moving forward, I want to show a title for this page here that we can show inside this parent component here, payment details. So before this child component, I will add this element from Bootstrap, Jumbotron. We can use this component for showing titles for an application. Inside that, I will add this h1 element with these classes display for and one more class text sender to align this text in sender horizontally. Inside that, we can show this payment detail register. Sorry, here we have a typo, Jumbotron. Let me save this back to the application. So this is how it looks like. By default, this element has extra padding vertically. So in order to avoid that, we can use this spacing helper class from Bootstrap, padding horizontally. We will set that of the range 3. Maximum we can set it to the range 5. Now let me save this back to the application. That's enough. Now let's avoid stretching this form here. For that, we will add a Bootstrap grid system with two columns. Inside the first column, we will be showing this form here. And inside the second half, we will show a list of inserted records later. Now, in order to add the Bootstrap grid system with a MET abbreviation, you could do this. First of all, we need a div with this class raw. And inside that, we need div with this class called MD6. Like this, we need two divs inside this div here. Multiply by 2. Now hit tab. That's it. So here we have the outer raw div, and inside that we have two columns with call MD6. Now let's move this form into this div here. Paste the cursor on this line, then hold Alt, then use the upward arrow to move the line upward. And inside this second column here, we will show list of our payment details later. Inside the first column, we have shown the form, and later we will be showing a table with inserted records. Now, in order to style these form controls here, let me add some CSS rules that I have already prepared. So I will paste that into this style sheet here, styles.css. Okay, this styles.css is the global style sheet for this Angular application. Now let me save this and back to the application here. Now currently values inside these form controls are showing from the service property form data through data binding. So here is the property form data from this service class of the type payment detail. We have initialized that with a fresh instance of the class here. Now we are going to implement validation inside this form here. So first of all, I want to disable default HTML validation. For that, we just need to add this attribute here, no validate. So I'm going to implement validation inside these controls, like all of these fields should be mandatory or required before submitting this form here. Before that, we forgot to add the submit button into the form. So let's do that and then we will deal with the validation. So back to the form, and here let's add another div with this class form group. Inside that, we need to add this button with these classes btn, then btn info. In order to enlarge this button, we can add this class btn lg, and finally btn block to extend this class within this outer form group div here. Now hit tab. Type of this button will be submit. Button text will be submit. Now we want to implement the validation like this. All of these input controls are required in order to submit this form here. So required validation will be applied to all of these 4 controls. And then number of characters inside these input controls are limited. Here it should be 16 characters, and here it will be 3 characters, and finally here we need 5 characters. So let's look how we can implement that. For now, please ignore this warning from the browser Google Chrome. Since these form controls are asking for payment details or credit card or debit card details, it complains we are not using a secure connection for this page here, meaning we are using HTTP instead of HTTPS. Now let's apply those validations here. Card owner name is required, and we have to apply the same validation for rest of these controls also. So we have applied required validation for all of these input controls here. Now inside this card number input control, we must have 16 characters. So I will set this attribute max length as 16. And also we have to set the min length as 16. Now let me copy paste this for rest of the controls here. For this security code, we restrict 3 characters. And that of this expiration date, we have 5 characters. Now we have applied the validation. Now what? We want to show validation error indications for respective controls. So first of all, if this form as a whole is not valid, I will disable this submit button so that we can prevent the user from submitting this form here. For that, first of all, we have to set a local reference for this form here. And we can do that like this, form. So here we have the local reference, and we will assign it with this ng form. Now we can refer this form here with this local reference here, form. Now with this, we can disable this submit button here. We will apply this attribute disabled if the form is invalid. For that, we can check this property invalid. So this is how it works. This disabled is a property for this button here. If we assign this with true here, then this button will be disabled. And that happens when this form as a whole is invalid. Now let's check that here. Because of this disabled property here, the submit button is disabled since this form is not valid as a whole. Now let's populate this form with random values like this. 16-digit card number, security code, expiration date. That's it. When this form as a whole is valid, this button will be enabled. Now let's show validation error indications to respective input controls here. So first of all, we have to familiar with some properties related to validation. So head over to the official documentation for Angular, which is angular.io. Then search for form control here. So here it is. So all of these form controls inside this form will be treated as a form control in Angular. Within this class, we have some properties related to validation. First of all, these 2 properties, valid and invalid. These properties indicates whether a given property is valid or not. And then we have these 2 properties, touched and untouched. indicating whether a given control is touched at least once after rendering the form. And then just above that we have these two properties, pristine and dirty. If the control still holds the initial value, then this property pristine will be set as true. Generally, validation in Angular is done using these three pairs of properties here. So let's look how we can do the same inside our app. So we will do this. We will apply this class invalid. I have already added corresponding CSS rules inside this global style sheet here, styles.css. So if an input control has this class invalid, respective control border will be set as red. So back to the HTML form here. For that you can use the shortcut hold control then press tab so that we can easily open the recent file. Hold control then press tab. So we will apply this class invalid based on the condition that we are going to specify here. So here is the condition. If this control card on a name is invalid and it is touched, card on a name dot touched. Back to the application. Currently this control is invalid. Still there is no red border because we have not yet touched the control. Just place the cursor inside the control, then click outside. So currently this control is touched and still it is invalid. And then this invalid class will be applied. We are not using the property pristine or dirty. You could use that property also. For example, instead of touched, we will check this property dirty, meaning there is a change from its initial value. Still, if it is invalid, we will apply this invalid class here. So based on your logic of implementing the validation, you can make use of these properties here. For this form validation, we will be using touched instead of dirty. Now let me copy paste the same for rest of the controls here. Now we have to change this control name appropriately. So instead of card owner name, we have to use card number. So select the word, Control D, then paste the card number here. Now back to the application. Let's check whether validation is working or not. First of all, this form as a whole is not valid, so the submit button is disabled. Let's try the validation of this card number here. Let's try a random card number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Still there is only 15 characters, so this control is invalid. Now there is 16 characters, so this control is valid now. So this is how validation works in Angular. This is not enough in a practical application. You have to implement the same validation in server side also. For that, you have to add corresponding attributes for these properties. I will leave it for you later. You could do that once you complete this tutorial. Now, we are going to submit this form into the ASP.NET Core Web API here. We are already running this API through this option, Start Without Debugging. Now let's submit the form so that we can insert a new payment detail into the DB. So first of all, I will add submit event to the form here. So let's add the submit event like this. Submit. The form submit event will be handled inside this function on submit. Into that we have to pass this form reference here. So form. Now let's define this function inside this TypeScript file here. On submit, for this function we have a single parameter form which is of the type ng form. Now within this function we have to make a post request into the Web API here. For that we will define a separate function inside this service class here. In order to make HTTP request from Angular application, we will be using HTTP client. So first of all, let's import that up here. From Angular common HTTP, we have to import HTTP client. Now let's inject the same inside this constructor here. Private HTTP of the type HTTP client. Now to make the post request, I will define a new function, post payment detail. Now inside the function we could do this dot HTTP dot post function can be called. As a first parameter we have to pass the URL up to this post web method inside the controller here. Now let me copy this. I will define a read-only property here. Base URL is equal to, I will paste the same API/payment detail. Now we can pass the same here, base URL. As a second parameter, we have to pass an object of payment detail which is to be inserted like we have done here within this UI. So we have to pass a JSON like this through this second parameter here. It will be there inside this form data properties since we have binded its properties through two-way data binding here. So whenever we change values inside these input controls here, corresponding properties, card owner, card number, whatever, will be updated accordingly. So while making this post request, we just need to pass the object form data here. Now, when we use this class HTTP client, we have to import corresponding module into app.module.ts file here. So let's add that into this imports array HTTP client module. So this will make a post request into this Web API method here. And this function returns an observable as you can see here. So we will return the same from this function here. Now back to the component TypeScript file, we can call the function here, this dot service dot post payment detail. We will call the function here, it returns an observable, so we can subscribe to that to work with the response. Subscribe. As a first callback function, we have the success function. So when this request is successful, this callback function will be invoked. So whatever we have to do when this request is successful, we can do that within this pair of curly brace here. If there is an error, we can handle that inside this second callback function here. For now, I will just print the error message in console window. So we have done everything for making the post request. There is one more thing we often forget. When we access an API, whether it is ASP.NET Core or Python, Django, whatever it may be, there will be a security feature called CORS. When an application tries to consume this Web API from an application which is hosted in a different domain or port number, it will block that application from accessing its resources. It's called CORS, cross resource sharing. So first of all, we have to allow requests from this port number inside this Web API here. Now let's look how to enable CORS in ASP.NET Core Web API. We could do that inside this startup.cs file here. Inside this function configure services, we will add CORS. So services dot add CORS. And within this configure function, we can allow requests from our Angular application. For that, we can call this function app.useCORS function can be called. In order to work this approach, we have to call this function before this routing here. Now, inside this function, we will pass this arrow function options. From that, we can call this with origins function. As a first parameter, we have to pass the URL of this Angular application. So I will just copy that from here and paste the same here. And you must remove this last / here. Now, in order to allow all of the web methods like get, put, delete, etc., we can call this function allow any method. Then after that, in order to allow all of the request header configurations, we could do this. In order to reflect these changes in running instance of this Web API, let me save this and then build this project again. Now let's try to submit this form so that we can make the post request into the Web API. Card owner name card number, security code, valid through, submit the form. Hope we made the post request successfully. Let's inspect this application here. There is no error showing. Let's check our DB here. Let's execute this select query here. Boom. So here we have the card details of Ava Elliott. So this is how we can insert a new record from Angular into ASP.NET Core Web API. Now, after submitting a form like this, we have to reset its form controls, and also we have to show corresponding notification saying this operation is when successful. So first of all, let's reset this form. So back to the corresponding component, I will define a function here, reset form, with a single parameter form of the type ng form. In order to reset an Angular form, we can make use of this ng form instance or the reference of the form. Inside that, we will be having another property with the same name, form. From that, we can call this function reset. And it is also recommended to clear these properties that is used for data binding here from this property form data. So I will just assign this property form data with a fresh instance of the payment detail model. So I will just update this form data with a fresh instance like this. This dot service dot form data is equal to new payment detail. Now let's call the same inside this success function here, reset form. Into this function we have to pass an instance of the form here. Now in order to show the notification, I will be using the npm package ngx toaster. So head over to the website npmjs.com. Then I'm gonna search for the package ngx toaster. So here it is. So here is the installation command. Let me copy that from here. While installing this package, please do check out this dependency section here, where it specifies the compatible version of Angular with its version. For versions above Angular 10, the current version is suitable. For the future versions of Angular, it might not be the case. So always check out this table dependencies and install the corresponding version. So I have copied this installation command. Now back to VS Code. Let's open a new terminal. I will paste the copied command here. Along with this package name, make sure to include the version that you can do with this @simple. Then provide the version that you can copy from here. Currently, I am installing the latest version. Based on your Angular version, you could copy the version from here. Let me paste the same here. We don't have to do this since we are using the latest version. If you want to install a different version from latest version, you have to do like this. Now hit enter. So here we have installed the package. Now back to the package documentation here. Along with installing this package, we also have to install a dependency package Angular animations. By default, this package will be already installed inside your application that you could see inside this file package.json here, Angular/animations. So we don't have to install that again. Now we have to update our app.module.ts file. We have to add browser animations and this toaster module also. First of all, let me copy this import statement from here and let's paste that here. Browser animations. Let's add that into this imports array, and we also have to add toaster module. From that, we can call this function for root. Through this function, we can pass global options or configurations for this toaster package as mentioned inside this documentation here. So these are the options that you can play with configuring this package, and you could pass an object with those options like this within this function for root. For now, we are not going to change any of the default configuration. Now back to the component here, payment detail form component. In order to show the notification with the installed package, first of all, we have to inject corresponding service class here. So private toaster of the type toaster service. Click on it. It will add the corresponding import statement at the top. If not, you have to add this import statement manually. To show a notification, we could do this dot toaster dot success function can be called. So it will show a green notification message. So here is the message submitted successfully. As a second parameter, we can pass a title for the notification. For now, I will set it as payment detail register. Finally, we have to do one more thing. We have to add the reference for this style sheet from the package toaster.css. It will be there inside this directory. So all of the packages that we install into this application will be there inside this folder node modules. So here is our corresponding package folder ngx toaster. Inside that we have this style sheet toaster.css. Now we have to add the corresponding style sheet reference inside this JSON file Angular JSON. So let me copy this reference from here. Now let's open angular.json file. So here it is, and then search for styles array. Actually there will be two styles array. One is inside this build object, and there will be one more array with the same name styles within this test object. We have to add the styles reference into this build object array styles. Inside the array, we already have the default style sheet reference styles.css. Inside that we have added some predefined CSS rules. Now let's paste the toaster style sheet reference here. Most of the time when we update files outside this src folder, we may have to restart the server. So let me open the terminal here, view terminal, and here is the terminal where we have started our server. In order to restart the server, first of all we have to stop it. So use the shortcut Ctrl+C, then type y for yes, and execute this command again, ng serve --o. Now let me insert one more record to verify the reset operation and the notification works properly. Submit the form. Boom. So here we have reset the form, and you could see the corresponding notification message here. Now I'm going to retrieve all of these records from this table payment details with the help of Web API getWeb method here, get payment details. So back to the Angular application here, then open this service class. In order to store a list of payment details, I'm gonna add a new array here, list, which is an array of the type payment detail model class. Now let's define a function to retrieve all of those records from the Web API, and we will save that into this array here. So here is the function refresh list. To make a GET request with HTTP client, we could do this http.get function can be called, and let's pass the base URL here. And this function also returns an observable. So I will just convert that into a promise. So just call this function to promise. And then here is the success function. Inside that we have this callback function to deal with the success response. Here we can do this dot list. We are going to assign the response data that is retrieved from the server. So we want to convert this response into payment detail array. So here we have the function. It will make the GET request to retrieve all of the records like we have done with the GET request here. And then we will save that retrieved records into the list array here. Now we have to display these list of records inside the parent component in place of the second grid column here. So here is our parent component payment detail TypeScript file. First of all, I will inject the service class here, service as payment detail service. And we will call this new function refresh list inside this ng on a lifecycle hook. This function will be invoked when this component is completely rendered. So we could do this dot service dot refresh list. So this function will initialize the list that we have inside the service class here. Now with this array we can design a table to show all of the records. So here is our parent component HTML file. Here we have the bootstrap grid. Inside the first column we have shown the form for the CRUD operation, and inside the second column we can show a table to list all of the records that we have inserted. Instead of this span element here, we need a table with this class table from bootstrap, and then inside that we have thead with this bootstrap class thead light. Inside that we have this row with 4 header columns, so th into 4. Inside the first column we will show card owner, then card number. As you can see, the MN abbreviation is really helping me. And then we have expiration date, so here it is. And inside the last column we will be showing action buttons like delete and update. Just after this thead we have tbody. Inside this tbody we need table rows as much as records that we have inside this array. So basically here we are going to iterate through the array for showing each of the payment details. So we could do this. So we will be showing table row by iterating through the array. Inside each array we need 4 TD cells. So here it is. In order to iterate through the array, we could do this. You can use this ng4 directive. ng4 is equal to let payment details, so pd of service.list. So here we are going to iterate through this list array from the service, and on each iteration the corresponding iteration record will be saved into this variable here pd. With that we can show the corresponding record details inside these td cells here. pd dot card owner name, pd card number, expiration date, and inside this last column we will show an icon for delete operation. So here it is, I element with these classes for the phone over some icon, for then far trash alt. Then to enlarge this icon we can use this class, and to color the icon we have text danger class from bootstrap. Now let me save this and back to the application here. Boom. So here we have the records that we have just inserted before. After making these changes inside our application, I was getting this error even though there was no such error inside our application. So I decided to restart the server, so everything went successful. So while you develop the application, if you are getting errors like this even after you have done everything properly, try to restart the application. It might resolve the problem. I hope Angular team will resolve these problems in future. Now let's look how to update this record here. For that, user can click on this array. The corresponding record details will be populated inside the form here. After making record changes inside these controls, he can submit the form for the update operation. So first of all, we have to wire up a function for the click event for this row here. So back to the parent component HTML. Let's add a click event for these TD cells here. Click is equal to, we will call this function populate form. Into that we will pass this object corresponding to the current payment detail. Now let me copy this and pasting for rest of the TD cells except the last one. Now back to the parent component. Let's define the function here, populate form. For this function we have a single parameter selected record, which is of the type payment detail model class. Now in order to fill the selected record details inside the form here, we just need to update this property form data in service class. For that we could do this dot service form data is equal to selected record. Now if we directly assign the selected object into this form data, there is a problem. Let's check that here. When we click on this array, corresponding record details are populated here. Now as we change values inside these input controls here, at the same time the property will be saved inside this table also. It is because of this direct assignment here. We are just passing the reference of this object into this, so whatever changes we make inside this will also reflect inside this object also. So in order to avoid this problem, we are going to make a copy of this object and then assign that into this property here. So we could do this object dot assign. Then as a first parameter, we can pass this empty object, and then we could pass this selected record here. Now user can make the required changes here, and then after that he just need to submit this form here. Inside the form submit event, we have to handle the update operation also. So here we have the corresponding component payment detail form. Inside the submit event function on submit, we have already done the insert operation. Now we also have to implement update operation also. So I'm going to define separate functions for insert and update operation. So insert record with a single parameter form of the type ng form. Now let's cut this insert operation from here, and then I will paste that inside this new function. Now I will define another function for update operation, update record. Inside this onSubmit function, we will decide whether we have an insert or update operation based on the ID value. We have already added a corresponding input hidden field here. So based on the value of this property payment detail ID, we can decide whether we have an insert or update operation. Initially it will be 0. We will do the insert operation. For an update operation, there will be a non-zero value. So here we have the if statement. Inside that we will check the value of the ID. So this dot service dot form data dot payment detail ID. If it is equal to 0, then we will do the insert operation. We can directly call the function insert record by passing this form parameter. Else we will do the update operation. For an update operation, we have to call this put web method from our ASP.NET Core Web API here. So I will just define another function inside this service clause here. It is almost similar to this post function, so I will just copy this and pasting that below. Put payment detail. Instead of post function, we can call this put function. For an update or put web method, we have to pass the ID along with the URL. So we could do this. We will be using the string interpolation. So we will just enclose this URL within backticks. Here we have to replace the value from this read-only property. So we can do this. And then after that, we need a / followed by the ID of this object. So we could do this dot form data dot payment detail ID. Inside this function also we have returned the observable from the put function, and we will do the rest of the job while calling this function put payment detail, that is inside the function here within this payment form component. Invoking the function is similar to this function called here, so I will just copy this and pasting here. Just call this function put payment detail. If the operation is successful, we will reset the form and we will be showing this notification tosser message as info, so that it will show the notification in a blue color, and we will say updated successfully. And let me update this record here. Before that, I want to prevent this autocomplete or auto prediction from previously posted data. For that, we just need to update the form design here. Just add this attribute autocomplete as off for the form. Okay. Now back to the application. To update this record, click on it, then change the details as you wish in order to check whether the update operation is working or not. Usually I add this suffix with asterisk marks. Submit the form. So here we have successfully updated the record, but it is not shown here because we have not yet refreshed this table here. So back to the application, and then to the TypeScript file of this form component, we have to call this function this dot service dot refresh list. Now let's call the same inside the insert function also. Save, back to the application. So after saving the project here, the application here automatically reloads, and thereby here we have the updated data. Now let's try to update that back to the previous value. So let me remove this asterisk marks from here, submit the form, boom. So in this way, we will refresh the table after any of the operations. Now finally, here we have the delete operation. For that, let's wire up a function for this button or icon click event. So back to the parent component HTML file here. In order to see all of these opened tabs, you could use the same shortcut, hold Control, then keep pressing tab so that you can go through the tabs that you have opened. So here is our parent component HTML. Let's add a click event for this icon here. Click. Now let's call this function. On delete, into the function we have to pass the corresponding ID. So payment detail ID. Now let's define this function inside the TypeScript file here. So here we have the function with single parameter ID, which is of the type number. Since we are using strict mode here, we have to specify the type of the parameter. By doing so, we can avoid runtime errors while passing data types which we not meant to pass into this function. So that's the benefit of enforcing strict mode. Before completing this function definition here, let's define one more function for making the delete request from our service class. So here is the function delete payment detail. Here we have a single parameter of the type number. Let me copy this line from here and pasting here. Instead of calling put method, we have to call delete. For this function, we just need one parameter, which is the URL for the web method. So here we are trying to access the web API method here, delete. Okay. So here we have called the function delete with the exact URL by appending the base URL with the corresponding ID. So here we just need to pass the ID parameter. So this delete function also returns an observer, so we can return the same from this function. Now back to the component TypeScript file here. Let's call the new function this.service.delete payment detail. It returns an observable. So we can subscribe to that observable here. So here we have the success callback and then error callback. Now let's pass the ID into the function. When this request fails, we will just log the error. If the web API delete the request successfully, first of all, we will refresh the list from the service. So service.refresh list function can be called. And then we have to show the toaster notification like we have done inside the form component. So first of all, we have to inject the toaster service here. Toaster service, this dot toaster dot, sorry, let me rename this properly, toaster. So toaster dot error function can be called so that it will show the notification in a red color. So we can say this deleted successfully. As a title, we can pass this payment detail register. Here we forgot to confirm the operation from user side. Since delete operation involves loss of data, we have to confirm that from user side. So we could do this. We will just call the function confirm. It will open a dialog. Inside that, we can ask this question, are you sure to delete this record? We will execute this delete operation only when user confirms this operation. Okay. Now let's try to delete this record here. Confirm the operation. Boom. We have deleted the record in Web API and the list is refreshed here. Let's check that inside this management studio here. Let me execute this select query again. That's it. So that's it, guys. Here we have implemented ASP.NET Core CRUD Operations with Angular using latest versions of these frameworks. If you face any problem implementing this application, let me know in comment box below. You could download this project source code from the GitHub link given below in video description. If you found this video helpful, please thumbs up this video, and for more awesome videos like this, please be subscribed to CodAffection. Please share this video with your friends and colleagues so that they can also benefit from this. Have a nice day. Bye.